Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Socially Radical Guitarist. The song you heard just now was Alex Cuba's Cuidar Hembra, La Habana. Very beautiful song. Um, he does so much just with the acoustic guitar. He has tremendous proficiency, tremendous skill. A great contribution to Western culture by the Cubans. Remember that. So we have the last guest of the season of the year, Arnold August. Um, Arnold August was like he's an interview like a he's a journalist that's been on many different platforms, and some of those platforms include Press TV, includes the Canada Files, of course, is a contributing editor. Um, he's been on teleSur, and he's an author of 3 books on Cuba, U.S., Latin America, Cuban, and he's been awarded journalist. He's gotten the Cuban Union of Journalists Awards. So welcome, Arnold.
It's a pleasure to be. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah. So we're going to get into a very juicy article,
Right.
On basically this November 15th conspiracy.
Right.
And um, the one thing that kind of really stuck out to me was that it really exposes the lie of this being peaceful protests very clearly. Can you get into at least some of the most suspicious figures orchestrating this basically a coup attempt in Cuba?
Yes. Thanks for taking the time to patiently read through that whole article. Just to provide you some background, what happened was that some of the coordinators of this Facebook group, Archipelago, made a formal request to local municipal assemblies in Havana and other cities. And based on quoting the Cuban Constitution, Article 56, they said, we have the right for a peaceful demonstration. Very nice. But they did not quote the other part of that very same Article 56, where it indicates very clearly people have a right to demonstrate peacefully as long as it is in respect for order and the rules of the land. And of course, Chris, they never touched Article 4, which says that the socialism in Cuba is irreversible. It cannot be overthrown. Now, some people might say, well, that's pretty arbitrary. The Cuban government says that socialism is irreversible. Well, not quite arbitrary at all. In fact, in 2019, the Cubans had a major consultation to update their constitution, and this includes this article saying that socialism is irreversible. Now, over 84% of the people voted in the referendum on the Constitution in 2019, and of that 84%, more than 86% voted in favor of it. So one can safely say that the vast majority of the Cuban people support that Article 4, while the coordinators Archipelago was to go against that. Now, with regards to, now that when I saw this request that they made and why it was refused, and they made it on behalf of this Facebook group, talking about their interest in a peaceful demonstration. So I said, I have to get into that Facebook group and really see what it's all about. Is it true? Is it true that it is peaceful? Do they have peaceful intentions or not? So I took a chance and I applied to become a member of that closed Facebook group. And to my surprise, I was accepted. I don't know how I got through. Perhaps I looked at the profile on my Facebook, page, and I have, my book's called Democracy in Cuba. So they might have said, oh, this guy's with us. He's for democracy in Cuba, like we are for democracy in Cuba. But my democracy in Cuba is not quite the same. But in any case, I got in. And I really dealt, it was really important. I'm glad that I did it. And just to give you an idea, first thing is, you mentioned the issue of violence. Now, in that Facebook group, there are innumerable indications that far from being peaceful, they are in fact very much in favor of violence and chaos in Cuba. For example, in that Facebook page, you have images of cars being overturned, people taking selfies with cars being overturned. They also have images from Venezuela several years ago when the pro-US forces in Venezuela organized what they called guarimbas, or burning barricades in Caracas in order to overthrow the Maduro government, far from being peaceful, right? And also I noticed in that Facebook group, it was not just November 15th, it was an ongoing thing. So we're going for November 15th, but this should take place every week, every month. They're looking for ongoing chaos in Cuba. And on the issue of blockade, very interesting. At one point, the American Joe Biden said that he's going to impose more sanctions against Cuba because of their repression in Cuba. But these guys, they were not satisfied. But you have to do more than just sanction individuals. You have to hit hard with more sanctions on the whole Cuban economy, etc. Is that peaceful? Asking Biden to increase the sanctions over and above what Biden is suggesting as far as sanctions are concerned. And, so there are many graphics, photographs of confrontations depicting perhaps confrontation between the people on the one hand and the police and military on the other hand in Cuba. And then there are very violent calls, down with the dictators and down with Fidel. I mean, just one thing, the way they ridicule and mimic and smear Fidel Castro. I tell you, Chris, this is worse than what I had seen in Miami. Miami Herald does not go so far as this group in terms of maligning Fidel Castro. Now, at the same time, I noticed, I think this is important, while they are, in favor of violence, they also provide a left image. I mean, they're not fools. I mean, that is why the United States is counting more on these type of artists, because they try to give sort of a left tinge to their obvious attempt of regime change. For example, in their Facebook page, believe it or not, they have quotes from Martin Luther King. They even have a partial quote from Fidel Castro where he says, we have to change everything that has to be changed. But of course, they left out the first word, that in revolution, we have to change anything that has to be changed to safeguard the revolution. And then you have the, definition, the confrontation with police. Interesting to note that that with regards to this left tinge, like the leader, the coordinator, this Junior Garcia, who is now in Madrid, in an interview with the Miami Herald, he said openly, I am appealing to the left in the United States, Canada, all over the world, including in Cuba, to support us. So you have this very tricky thing, trying to give a left tinge to it. Now, how does this, sort of left alternative play out? There was an interesting presentation by one of my favorite Cuban journalists, Errol Sanchez, in a July 26th webinar on Cuba, in which he explained, it's quite simple. How does this operate in terms of these so-called leftists in Cuba and elsewhere? You have these openly violent provocations by people such as the Archielguero on the one hand, and then you have these academics coming on and saying, oh, we're against both sides. We're against the crackdown by Miguel Diaz-Canel, and of course, we're against the overt violence by the members of this Facebook group, both citing everything. But the main message that they provide is that the opposition to Miguel Diaz-Canel and the Cuban government is valid. It's valid. So you have this very complicated situation. Now, in addition, I noticed in that Facebook page, there is a lot of emphasis on color revolution, the peaceful color revolution, so-called, and it's based on the 1989 color revolution in Czechoslovakia. And these coordinators openly align with themselves with this type of color revolution to provide an indication that it is really peaceful. It's a velvet revolution, all that. So you have this mix of open violence, calls for an increase in the blockade, being very violent in opposition to the Cuban leadership, to Fidel Castro, to Miguel Diaz-Canel, obvious in favor of regime change. And at the same time, they are trying to, and to a certain extent, Chris, I have to say, successfully influencing some people in the left, for example, United States, Canada, and elsewhere, to support directly or indirectly this color revolution regime change that was being led by this Facebook group. So it's a pretty complicated situation. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was I was kind of shocked to see like they, you quote Martin Luther King, a man who was assassinated by the government you're seeking to get support from. It kind of lays bare what you're doing. And the color revolution in Czechoslovakia was anything but peaceful.
Exactly.
In fact, and the U.S. bombing it and bombing whatever was left of that country tells you everything that you need to know. I want to get into a very interesting aspect that the people that the archipelago were interacting with were actually registered terrorists, according to the U.S.
Yes.
So this Ramon guy, can you get into Ramon and
yeah,
what
was that was a very interesting episode, which I had in the article which you read. Is that their hero, Garcia, so-called playwright, he had a phone call from Ramon Saul, who was a long time admitted terrorist living in Miami. I mean, he has been, accused and convicted of terrorist activities. So Garcia, he received that phone call and answered in a very, oh yes, good to hear from you. How's it going? And Ramon Saul said, well, we are fully and supportive of you. We are behind you. You can count on us. So, it just goes to show, I mean, what kind of peaceful activity are they in when they have the full support and are collaborating with open terrorists, even by the definition of the United States, that live in Miami. So very far from being something that it is peaceful.
Yes. I mean, yeah, that was quite a shocking thing to hear when I was looking into it. Of course, you've seen cases of this before. You've seen the U.S. even using Al Qaeda in Syria, but to see that it's become more common practice even in the regional hemisphere. Yeah, this is a very eye-opening thing. Can you draw more comparisons to what was done in Venezuela and what was done in Cuba, and how those forces ended up being aligned?
Yeah, sure. That's good, because it brings up the current situation where you have an open alliance between Junior Garcia and the Venezuelan leaders of the attempt of a coup d'etat against Maduro. What happened in Venezuela is that after the elections of Maduro, the agents of the United States, all in favor of using violence to overthrow Maduro, set up barricades in Caracas, and very violent incidents took place. Many people were killed, wounded. They even, sort of tagged someone. Oh, this guy must be a Chavista. In addition, he was a black Chavista. They just burned him. They burned him, okay, to death. Now the point is that this type of activity is showcased in the Archipelago Facebook page. So this is what happened in Venezuela. Now, just moving forward now, those who were in favor of these type of destabilizing activity in Venezuela to overthrow the legitimate Maduro government, both of them were in Madrid lately. For example, we know Junior Garcia fled to Madrid around November 15th, and he was soon joined by one of the leaders of those violent attempts at the overthrow of Maduro after his election. And what did they say? Well, specifically, Junior Garcia said from Madrid that what we need is a coalition of opponents like us, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, to work together in order to carry out regime change in all these countries. So you have this sort of a new international being established of those who are in favor of violent regime change, not only in Cuba, but at least 3 countries. So this is a very serious situation. Now, the thing is that on November 15, as a result of the massive activity by the Cuban government, grassroots organizations in the neighborhood level, it never got off the ground. No one ever showed up. So this is a very complicated thing. I'm working on this now. Why did it fail? I hope to have another article in a couple of days on the real nature of why it failed. Of course, it failed. Of course, the buzzwords are often used. Oh, it was repression, suppression, arbitrary detention, etc. But that is not what caused their failure. It's something else, which I will be dealing with in my next article.
Wow. Can you get into the complicity of the Canadian left? Like, because officially the Canadian government, they opposed the blockade against Cuba in the UN, and a lot of people aren't really privy to the hostility that Canada shows to Cuba, because they oppose the blockade, and they allow the tourist relations and basically Cuba Canada relations. So can you get into that and the complicity of left leaning articles like Rabble, etc., in being the left that opposes the government?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because the Canadian government, yes, the images portray that the Canadian government is a friend of Cuba. However, if we just take the current situation, since these protests erupted in Cuba, the Canadian government has made 3 declarations, openly through the government channels, and also through a question and answer period, which journalists had with Justin Trudeau. 3, and all 3 of them, they say they deplore what is happening in Cuba, what they call the political crackdown. And they say, we stand for the right of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly in Cuba without any interference by the government. And at one point, Trudeau actually used the word regime to refer to the Cuban government. Wait a second now, Trudeau, you have diplomatic relations with Cuba. How can you call the Cuban government a regime? Isn't this in violation of the long-standing tradition of Canada to have friendly relations with Cuba? Now, this wasn't a slip of a tongue. I mean, it was a specific word that he used, was picked up perhaps by one of the most right-wing journalists writing for CBC, who wrote in an article about July 11th, just threw this out, and Miguel Diaz-Canel, the unelected president of Cuba. You know, even the United States media has not said that he is the unelected president of Cuba. They recognize him as the elected president of Cuba, even though they do not, support him. So this Trudeau opened up a whole can of worms by using the word regime, like 3 statements in support of the color revolution in Cuba, either directly or indirectly. But during that period, not one single declaration by the Trudeau government against the over 240 measures taken by Trump during the pandemic and continued by Biden. These are really, these measures are wreaking havoc in the Cuban situation, economy, and society. But how come he had nothing to say about that, but only to be critical of the Cuban government? I mean, at one point, the Marc Garneau had a call with his vis-a-vis in Cuba, Bruno Rodriguez, and Marc Garneau said, well, we are concerned about the political crackdown in Cuba and all that. But, why doesn't he go to Trump or now Biden and say, look, we are concerned as friends of Canadians about these sanctions that are being imposed by the United States, more severe than any other administration since 1960. Not one single word against that. So I agree with your evaluation. Canada is in an indirect or almost direct manner in complicity with the United States, first Trump and now Biden, in increasing the sanctions and pressure against the Cuban government. And I think Canadians are not aware of it. It's being kept from them. I mean, the image is being portrayed that Trudeau is a nice guy, he's a friend of Cuba, because his actual statements with regards to the color revolution in Cuba is sort of kept aside under the rug in order to continue to portray Trudeau as a friend of Cuba, which he is not.
Oh, definitely. So yeah, that's pretty eye-opening to see. For any liberal out there still listening to this, it's time for you to convert. I converted a while ago after Libya, but you should really open your eyes and see what's going on.
Yes.
Now, any final messages to the Canadian public, international public, whoever might be listening or watching this program about the situation? What is the final message that you want to give to our audience?
I think the most important thing, there are many, but the most important thing is for people to be wary of the notion that these are peaceful demonstrations that were supposed to take place in November and that are being inevitably planned for later on. My investigation has shown everyone has access to my article that is far from being peaceful. They are in favor of a violent regime change. Now, the fact that they cannot succeed, I'm convinced they cannot succeed, does not take away from the fact that they are trying so. And this is very unsettling for the Cuban government, trying to deal with the pandemic, the increased measures of the blockade, the economic crisis, and at the same time fending off these attempts, even though they invariably will be unsuccessful, fighting off these attempts to foment chaos and violence in Cuba. So the most important thing to remember that these are not pacifists, far from being so. They are really in favor of violent regime change in Cuba. And, just give you one example, the example is often given that, well, the Cuban government is using repression. For example, when in a neighborhood, neighbors conglomerate in front of the apartment of some of these stalwarts from the Facebook page, letting off steam what they think about him, that they're traitors, that they're mercenaries. Was, oh, there's something, oh, that's terrible. I don't think that's repression. I think that's liberation. Cubans are rightfully venting their sentiment in favor of what they have accomplished, in favor of their revolution against those people without any principle, as mercenaries of the United States, trying to overthrow everything that has been accomplished since 1959 to date. And so people have to, measure these things when they talk about repression or whatever. It is far from me. It's actually, from a Cuban point of view, by doing this, by calling out these traitors, these mercenaries, it is a form of liberation for themselves. They are affirming with all the right that they have that it is their revolution and they have a right to defend it. And this was even affirmed by the vote in the Constitution in 2019.
Excellent final statement. Now we're going to be closing the show with a song that Arnold August picked. It's from a pretty embarrassing period of my life, but he thought it sounded good. So what's the name of the song, Arnold?
Well, I don't remember, but I'll let you introduce the song.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I was made of fire by the
Oh, right.
Magical
How can I
Bunch.
forget? Yeah, right.
Made of Fire by the Magical Bunch. So um, we'll be doing the outro. Listen to Made of Fire from the Magical Bunch, and then that'll be the end of the show. We'll see you next week.